Clara Redford stood in the middle of her small, dimly lit kitchen, the fire in the hearth barely more than glowing embers. The storm outside raged, its fierce winds shaking the walls of the old ranch house. It had been a long winter, and the cold had settled deep into her bones, the loneliness even deeper. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the last few logs to stoke the fire, but it was hardly worth it. The chill always seemed to creep back in no matter how much she tried to fight it. She had once loved this place. Samuel had loved it too. Together they had dreamed of expanding, of building a future on this land they had worked so hard to claim. But that was before the fever took him, before it wiped out most of the people she had known, before it left her alone with memories and debts she could no longer manage. She often found herself wondering if she could have fought harder, if she could have done something different to save him. The thought of it gnawed at her, just as much as the worry of losing this place. She paused in the doorway to the kitchen, glancing down the hall toward the empty rooms. The house felt quieter with each passing day, the echoes of laughter and plans for the future long gone. The silence had a weight to it, a heavy, oppressive silence that made everything harder. Every step she took seemed to be one step closer to losing it all. The storm outside howled louder, and Clara shivered, rubbing her arms. The sound of a knock at the door shattered her thoughts. She froze, her pulse quickening. Who could be out there in this weather? She wiped her hands on her apron, wiping the sweat and grime from the day's work, then walked to the door, heart pounding in her chest. Another knock. Then a voice, muffled through the door, called out, "Mrs. Redford?" Clara's hand hovered over the door latch. It was late, and the storm was fierce. Whoever was out there had to have a good reason to be knocking at her door. Her mind raced. Could it be a neighbor, or her heart sank? Could it be someone from Hartwick's land? The rancher had been pressuring her for months now, making her offers she couldn't refuse. But she wouldn't sell, not without a fight. She slowly opened the door, wincing as the wind nearly slammed it back against the frame. Standing there in the snow, bundled against the storm, was a man. His face was half obscured by the brim of his hat, but his eyes, dark, worn, and determined, met hers. Behind him, the silhouette of a young child stood in the doorway, her wide eyes fixed on Clara. The man cleared his throat. "I'm Elias McCabe," he said, tipping his hat. "I was told you need a rancher." Clara blinked, surprised by the directness of his words. She looked past him at the child, a small girl who clung to his coat like a lifeline. Her heart squeezed, and she instinctively stepped back to let them in. The cold was biting, the wind relentless. "Come in, both of you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She opened the door wider, and the man entered, his boots crunching on the floor. The child hesitated, but the man gently nudged her forward. Clara's eyes softened as the girl stepped inside, brushing the snow off her coat. Once they were inside, the man kicked the snow off his boots and shook his coat, sending a flurry of snowflakes onto the floor. He turned to Clara. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am. We've been traveling for 3 days, caught in the storm yesterday. We found a line shack to wait it out, but, well, we're out of supplies." Clara nodded, her mind working quickly. She studied him, tall, rugged, and clearly worn by the journey. His voice carried an edge of exhaustion, but there was also a quiet strength about him that made her pause. There was something familiar about him, something that made her trust him immediately, even though she didn't know why. "I can work," Elias continued, his gaze shifting toward the girl who was still standing quietly by the door. "I've been around cattle all my life. I know how to fix fences, care for horses, whatever needs doing. I don't need wages, just food and shelter for my daughter." His voice tightened as he spoke the last words, and Clara could hear the desperation behind them. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the same look she had seen in her own reflection 1,000 times. Clara's heart tugged at the raw pain in his voice. "I'm Clara Redford," she said softly, her eyes flicking to the girl. "And you are?" "Laya," the child whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but there was a quiet strength in it too. "That's a beautiful name," Clara said. offering a small, reassuring smile. "You can stay here, both of you. But I can't offer you much. Firewood's running short, and the cattle are scattered. I can't even keep track of them in this storm." She glanced back at Elias. "I've been doing this alone for too long." He nodded slowly, understanding. "I know what it's like to struggle alone," he said quietly, "but I'll do what I can to help. For you and for Laya." Clara hesitated. There was a part of her that was afraid to let them stay, afraid of becoming attached to someone else, of getting her hopes up. But something in Elias's eyes, something that matched the quiet strength she'd clung to for so long, made her decision for her. "All right," she said, her voice firmer now. "You can stay. But we'll need to talk about what comes next. You can help with the cattle, and I'll feed you. But winter's harsh here, and I'm not sure how much help you can be with everything that's stacked against us." Elias's lips twisted into a small, tired smile. "I'm used to hard work, Mrs. Redford. You'll see that soon enough." Clara nodded, though the doubt in her heart still lingered. She had made room for one more person in her home, but the storms outside, and the ones brewing inside her heart, hadn't passed yet. She watched as Elias settled by the fire, the small girl sitting at his side. The silence between them was comfortable, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the room. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she wasn't alone in the world. But trust, she knew, was a slow thing. And in the bitter winds of the Montana plains, everything could change in a heartbeat. The wind howled through the cracks of the old ranch house, but inside, the fire flickered brightly. The storm outside seemed to have only intensified overnight, and the wind had begun to rattle the windows, shaking the walls with the ferocity of the Montana winter. Yet inside, the warmth of the hearth created a quiet, almost peaceful contrast to the chaos outside. Clara moved about the kitchen, setting a pot of stew on the stove, while Elias and Laya sat at the table. The girl, Laya, was quietly drawing in the corner, her small hands trembling slightly as she held the pencil, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elias had removed his coat and sat with his arms crossed, eyes following Clara as she moved around the room. "Thank you, Mrs. Redford," he said quietly, breaking the silence, "for letting us stay." His voice carried a weariness, but there was a calmness to it, as if he was used to living life in the margins. Clara stopped for a moment, looking at him over her shoulder. She could see the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the wear of a man who had traveled far, both physically and emotionally. His eyes, though, held something else, a kind of quiet determination, as if he were always waiting for the next storm to pass. "You're welcome," Clara replied, though she wasn't sure what she meant by it. She had been alone for so long, used to the silence that stretched out across the land. The thought of having someone here, someone who wasn't just another stranger passing through, was both comforting and unsettling. She wasn't sure how to navigate the space between them, but there was a subtle kindness in Elias that made her want to trust him. Laya glanced up from her drawing, her eyes dark and intense for someone so young. "Papa says the storm won't stop soon," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I think it's okay. We'll be safe here." Clara's chest tightened at the words, her thoughts briefly drifting back to the long months she had spent alone with only the memory of her late husband to keep her company. It had been the hardest time of her life, and the loneliness had nearly broken her. To hear this little girl speak of safety, as if they were already part of something, sent a warmth through her, like a spark in the dead of winter. She cleared her throat, trying to push the emotions away. "I'm sure we'll be fine," Clara replied, though she wasn't certain. The storm outside seemed to mirror the one inside her own heart. Everything felt fragile, like the snowdrifts outside that could be swept away with a single gust of wind. The sound of Laya's pencil scratching against paper broke the silence once more. Clara watched the girl work, her brow still furrowed in concentration, and a strange sense of responsibility swept over her. She had promised them shelter, but in doing so, she was also taking on a kind of bond, one that stretched beyond just a roof over their heads. It was something more, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Elias caught her eye and gave her a small nod, as though he understood the weight of the moment, though neither of them had said a word about it. It wasn't something that could be voiced so easily. After a moment he stood, stretching his long limbs. "I'll go check on the stock," he said, his tone even, but with a sense of purpose that seemed to define him. "The cattle should be in the barn. We might lose a few in this storm." Clara nodded, though the thought of losing any more livestock made her stomach tighten. She had already lost too much, too many cows to the winter cold, and too many chances at keeping this ranch alive, and now, with Elias here, she felt the pressure mounting. She couldn't afford to fail again. "I'll come with you," Clara said, gathering her coat. The cold outside wasn't something to be taken lightly, but she knew better than to let Elias go alone. He was still a stranger in many ways, and while she wanted to trust him, she didn't fully understand what he was capable of. Elias hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "It's not safe out there," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I can handle it. You need to stay in." Clara's pride flared, and she quickly stepped toward the door. "I'll help you with the cattle. It's my responsibility." Elias looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he sighed. "I know you're capable, Clara. I've seen the way you handle things. But it's not just about being capable. It's about being safe." For a moment, Clara stood still, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She wasn't used to being told what to do, especially not by a man. But there was something in his voice that told her he wasn't trying to undermine her. He was simply trying to protect her, and perhaps, by extension, himself. She realized then that he wasn't just here for work. He was here because he needed her, just as much as she needed him. "I'll stay inside," Clara said finally, feeling the tension leave her body. "But if you need anything, you call me." Elias smiled, a small, tired smile, and nodded. "Of course." Clara closed the door behind him and turned back to the warmth of the house, but the loneliness that had haunted her for so long returned, settling deep into her bones. She felt the absence of Samuel keenly now. Her hands tightened around the fabric of her coat, and she stood at the window, staring out into the swirling snow, wondering if she had made the right decision letting Elias stay. She thought about the promise she had made to keep this place alive, to keep fighting, no matter how hard it became. But this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building something new, something she could hold on to, even if it scared her to let herself believe it was possible. Outside, Elias moved toward the barn with a steady, purposeful gait, his coat whipping in the wind. Clara watched him for a moment longer, then turned away, focusing on the warmth that now filled the house. But her heart remained unsettled, unsure of what would come next. And as the storm raged outside, Clara couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of a new chapter in her life, or just another fleeting moment that would disappear in the wind? The next few days passed in a blur of cold wind and heavy snow. The storm had settled in, trapping Clara, Elias, and Laya in the small ranch house with little to do but wait for the weather to pass. Elias worked tirelessly, as promised, checking the cattle, mending the fence, and clearing paths to the barn. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He did what needed to be done without complaint, and Clara found herself silently grateful for his presence. It wasn't just the work he was doing. There was something about him, a quiet steadiness that settled over the ranch like a blanket. He was a man who had learned to survive, not by force, but by patience and hard work. It was the kind of strength Clara had longed for since Samuel had passed, the kind that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this too. Each evening after the work was done, they gathered around the fire in the main room, the three of them huddled together against the cold. Laya had started talking more, her shy nature slowly peeling away as she grew more comfortable in the warmth of the house. She asked Clara about the ranch, about her life before the storms had come, and Clara, despite herself, found herself answering with a tenderness she hadn't known she was capable of. The child's earnest questions were like a balm to her wounds, and the simple act of caring for Laya reminded Clara of what she had been fighting for all along. One night, after Laya had gone to bed, Clara found Elias sitting in front of the fire, his eyes distant. He hadn't spoken much that day, his face grim as he worked, But now, as the silence stretched between them, Clara couldn't ignore the heavy weight that hung in the air. She hesitated, unsure of how to approach him. He had done so much for them, but there was still a distance between them, an invisible barrier that she wasn't sure how to breach. "You've been quiet," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was softer than she intended, and Elias looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I've been thinking," he said simply, his voice low, "about Laya, about you." Quote. Clara felt her heart tighten, a mix of concern and curiosity swirling inside her. "What about us?" Elias shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly as if he were preparing to say something difficult. "I'm not used to letting people in," he said slowly, his voice tinged with a quiet vulnerability that surprised her, especially not after everything. Clara remained silent, letting him speak, her hands folded in her lap. She knew that pain. She had carried it for so long, felt its weight in every corner of her life. The loss, the loneliness, the uncertainty of moving forward when the past seemed so firmly anchored to her heart. "You don't have to explain," Clara said softly, her gaze dropping to the fire. "I understand. I've been there too." Elias nodded, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "I don't know how to make things right for Laya, for her mother. She's been through so much already, and I can't protect her from everything." He paused, his hand running through his dark hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I thought I could keep her safe, but it's not enough. She needs more." Clara watched him, her heart aching for the man who had lost so much. He carried the weight of a father's love, of a man who had fought for his family and failed. She could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the fear of not being enough. And yet, in that moment, she understood something that she hadn't fully realized before. Elias wasn't just here because he needed a job. He was here because he was trying to rebuild, to start over, to offer Laya a future that was free of the ghosts of the past. "You're doing your best, Elias," Clara said, her voice steady. "That's all any of us can do, and that's enough, more than enough." For a moment, Elias didn't respond. The words seemed to settle into the quiet between them, a fragile understanding passing between them that didn't need to be said aloud. Clara stood up then, her legs stiff from sitting for so long, and crossed the room to stoke the fire. She glanced back at him, feeling the weight of the unspoken things hanging in the air. "If you need to talk," she said, her voice softer now, "I'm here. I may not have all the answers, but I understand what it's like to carry that kind of weight." Elias met her gaze, his eyes filled with something that resembled gratitude, though he didn't speak. Instead, he nodded, and for the first time since he had arrived, Clara saw the guard around him begin to drop. Just a little. That night, after they had both gone to bed, Clara lay awake, staring up at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the occasional crack of the fire, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax, to feel the comfort of having someone nearby. It was a small thing, but it was enough to remind her that she wasn't alone anymore. But the fear still lingered, as it always did. The fear that this moment of peace was just a fleeting thing, that the storm would come again, stronger than before. Clara had been fighting for so long that it was hard to imagine a life where she didn't have to worry, where the ground beneath her feet didn't shift every time the wind blew. And yet, something in Elias's presence made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be a way forward, a way to rebuild, not just the ranch, but her own life, piece by piece. The next morning, after a breakfast of hot biscuits and thick stew, Clara bundled up and headed outside to check on the cattle. Elias was already out there, moving through the snow with purpose, his breath fogging in the cold air. She watched him for a moment, seeing the way he moved with confidence, as if he had always belonged here, even though it had only been a few days since he'd arrived. "Need some help?" Clara called out, her voice carrying through the quiet. Elias glanced over his shoulder, his face softening as he saw her approach. "I've got it under control, but I appreciate the offer." Clara nodded and watched him work for a moment longer. She wasn't sure what had brought him here, but in that moment, she realized that she was starting to trust him, not just with the ranch, but with her heart. Maybe this wasn't just about survival anymore. Maybe it was about something more. Something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but was beginning to hope for anyway. The days that followed felt like a slow thaw, the temperature dropping and rising in steady rhythm, as if the earth itself were trying to breathe again after a long, bitter winter. The snow in the valley began to retreat, exposing the patchy earth beneath, and the first signs of spring began to show. Clara, Elias, and Laya spent their time working together, repairing fences, moving the cattle to better grazing land, and making small but significant improvements to the ranch. Every task, no matter how mundane, felt like a small victory. Elias's presence, steady and unwavering, had become a comfort, and Clara found herself looking forward to the quiet moments they shared after the work was done. They ate their meals together, spoke in small bursts between chores, and shared the occasional laugh as Laya's energy filled the house. Despite the winter still lingering in the air, something about their daily routine started to feel more like a family, and less like a temporary arrangement. But Clara couldn't deny the tension in the air. It was subtle, hidden behind the easy camaraderie and shared tasks. The connection between her and Elias had deepened, but it was unspoken, fragile, still hesitant. She could see it in the way he looked at her sometimes, the way his eyes softened when she wasn't looking, and she saw it in herself too. She was beginning to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, something warm and dangerous, like the sun creeping out from behind storm clouds. One afternoon, as Clara stood by the barn mending a broken fence, Elias approached, his heavy boots crunching on the dirt path behind her. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron, expecting to see him with a comment about the weather or the cattle. Instead, he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite place, a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Clara," he began, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped in her chest, her breath catching. There was something in his tone that made her pause, setting her hands on the wood of the fence as if steadying herself. She nodded, her voice calm, though the nerves fluttered in her stomach. "What about?" Quote. Elias glanced down, his hands fidgeting with the brim of his hat as he stood just a few feet away. "About everything," he said slowly. "About what's happening here, with us." Clara's throat tightened, and she crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. The wind swept around them, carrying the scent of the earth and the distant smell of wood burning. She glanced down at the ground, avoiding his eyes for a moment, then met his gaze again, her heart pounding louder than the steady beat of the wind. "I thought we agreed to keep things simple," she said, her voice almost too quiet. "We're just trying to get through winter, get the ranch in shape." "I didn't expect." "I know," Elias interrupted gently. "I didn't either, but I can't keep pretending this is just about cattle and fences. About surviving." He took a step closer, his voice softer now. "I didn't expect this either, Clara, but I can't help how I feel, and I think you feel the same way." Clara felt the words hit her like a wave, and she stepped back instinctively, as if the force of them might knock her off balance. Her mind raced, her heart thudding painfully against her chest. She wanted to deny it, to say something that would push him away, to keep the walls she had carefully built around her heart intact. But the truth hung between them, undeniable and raw. "I can't," she whispered, though the words felt wrong as soon as they left her mouth. "I've been alone for so long. I can't." Her throat tightened again, and she felt a sharp sting in her chest, like she was choking on her own fear. "You're not alone anymore," Elias said softly, his voice steady, though his eyes held a vulnerability that made her breath catch. "Not with me, not with Laya." Clara shook her head, her fingers curling into the fence posts. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I've lost so much already. I can't lose this too." Quote. Elias stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers, as if trying to read the depth of her fear. "I'm not asking you to forget what you've lost, Clara. I know that pain. I know what it's like to lose everything, to feel like the world's been ripped away from you. But you can't keep fighting it alone." You don't have to." Clara's chest tightened, and for a moment she closed her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to rise. The truth was, she had been fighting it alone, all this time, afraid to let anyone in, afraid to trust that she could build something new from the ruins of her past. But Elias, standing in front of her, was offering her something she had been too scared to want: connection. Love, maybe, though she couldn't allow herself to say it. "I can't promise anything," she said, her voice trembling, despite her efforts to keep it steady. "But I'm not pushing you away, not anymore." Elias smiled, the warmth in his eyes flickering like the glow of a fire. "That's all I need, Clara. I'm not going anywhere, not unless you tell me to." Quote. Clara took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, steadying herself. For the first time in months, maybe longer, she felt the weight of the world lighten, just a little. It wasn't all settled. There was still so much uncertain, but in that moment, she knew that whatever happened next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. "You're right," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I've been alone for so long, I forgot what it felt like to be part of something. But I don't think I'm ready to fight this battle on my own anymore." Elias's eyes softened, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. The touch was warm, grounding, and Clara felt a small shiver run through her at the simple act of connection. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was about building something together, something they could hold on to, no matter what the future held. "I'm glad you feel that way," Elias said softly, squeezing her hand. "Because we're in this together, for as long as you'll have me." Clara's heart gave a small, hesitant flutter in her chest, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself feel the warmth of his touch, the hope in his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something good ahead. The sun was starting to dip low behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley as they stood together, hand in hand. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, and Clara felt like she had weathered one of her own, one she wasn't sure she would survive. But now, with Elias beside her, the world felt just a little more manageable. And for the first time in years, Clara felt like the storm inside her heart was beginning to clear. Spring came slowly, but it came nonetheless. The snowmelt had turned the valley into a mix of mud and new growth, patches of green pushing through the earth as if the land itself was waking up from a long slumber. Clara spent more time outside now, working alongside Elias to repair the fences that had been damaged during the winter, checking on the cattle, and preparing the ranch for the season ahead. The work was grueling, but it was also healing. The days were longer now, the sun dipping lower in the sky each evening. The ranch, once a lonely, silent place, now hummed with life. Elias and Laya had settled in, each of them fitting into her world like a piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized was incomplete. Elias worked like a man who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. His quiet strength was a comfort to her, a constant reminder that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight everything alone. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara stood in the yard, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the ranch. She could hear the sound of Elias and Laya laughing in the barn as they worked together to fix the roof. The sound was sweet, laughter that hadn't been heard in this place in far too long. Clara leaned against the fence, the soft evening breeze ruffling her hair. The smell of fresh earth and grass filled her lungs, and for the first time in months, she felt a deep, quiet peace. She didn't realize how much she had needed this quiet, this stability, until it was here. "You look like you're a million miles away." Clara turned to find Elias standing behind her, a small smile on his face as he wiped the sweat from his brow. He had the same steady, calm presence he always did, but there was something different about him today, something softer, like he was letting go of the burdens he had carried for so long. "I was just thinking," Clara said, pushing herself off the fence and turning to face him, "about how different things are now. How much has changed?" Elias nodded, taking a step closer to her. "I know what you mean. It feels right. Feels like it's ours again. Clara's heart gave a small, almost imperceptible flutter at his words. For so long, she had been fighting to keep the ranch alive, trying to hold on to something that seemed like it was slipping away. But with Elias here, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding, about creating something new from the ashes of what had been. Something that felt strong enough to last, even after everything they had lost. "I didn't think I could do it," Clara admitted softly, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't think I could keep going. After Samuel died, I thought it was all over. This place, this ranch, everything." Elias's expression softened, his gaze steady. "You've done more than keep it going, Clara. You've kept it alive. You've made it yours. And now, it's ours. All of us, together." She felt a lump form in her throat, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she hadn't fully allowed herself to acknowledge before. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, Elias spoke again. "I was thinking," he said, his voice low, almost tentative. "Maybe it's time we start thinking about what comes next, not just for the ranch, but for us." Clara's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Elias took a step closer, his expression more serious now. "I've been thinking about how much you've done for me and Laya. You've given us a place, a home, and I haven't been able to repay you for that. But I can't help but feel like there's something more here, something I want to offer, something I think we both deserve." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had known there was something between them, had felt it in the way their lives had intertwined so seamlessly, in the way Elias had quietly become an irreplaceable part of her world. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him express what she had only allowed herself to feel in the deepest corners of her heart, made everything feel more real. "What are you asking?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible against the wind. Elias looked down at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Clara. If you'll make us a family. For real. Not just a place to stay, not just two people trying to get by. I want to build something with you. With Laya. Something permanent. A future." Clara's chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't find the words. She had never imagined this, never imagined that she would find someone who would ask her to make a life with him again. After Samuel, after all the pain and heartache, she had told herself that she was done, that she would never open her heart again. But standing here, looking at Elias, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, hearing the hope in his voice, Clara realized something she hadn't allowed herself to understand before. She didn't have to be alone. She didn't have to keep fighting for survival. She could build a life again, a life full of love and strength and connection. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said softly, her voice shaking with the weight of the decision. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to build something with you. With Laya. I want to see where this can go." Elias's face softened into a smile, his eyes lighting up with something so pure and joyful that Clara felt her own heart lift in response. "That's all I need to hear. We'll take it one day at a time, together." He reached out then, his hand resting gently on hers. For a moment, they stood there, the warmth of the evening air surrounding them, the sound of Laya's laughter drifting from the barn. Everything felt right, as if the world had finally begun to settle into place. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. That night, after supper, Elias and Laya went out to the barn to finish up the day's work. Clara remained behind, sitting by the fire, her mind racing with everything that had just been said. She had spent so long trying to hold everything together, trying to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. And now, she had someone by her side who was willing to share that burden. As she sat in the quiet of the house, listening to the crackling fire and the sounds of life outside, Clara realized that this was the beginning of something new, something beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, it was the life she had been waiting for all along. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and unexpected joy. Spring fully arrived, transforming the valley into a sea of green, the air sweet with the scent of blooming wildflowers. Clara found herself lost in the rhythm of daily life, the simplicity of it all, bringing a peace she hadn't known in years. The work was still hard. There were fences to mend, cattle to check, and land to tend. But now, it didn't feel like an endless battle against nature. It felt like building, like creating something with her own hands. Elias and Laya had become integral parts of her world. Elias, with his quiet determination, had worked alongside her as if he had always belonged here. He repaired the broken sections of the fence, tended to the horses, and helped her round up the cattle, his strong hands moving with the grace of someone who knew the land better than he would ever admit. And Laya, sweet, bright Laya, had filled the house with laughter and light. She followed Clara around like a little shadow, asking questions and soaking up everything she could, just as Clara had once dreamed of teaching her own child. One warm afternoon, Clara stood at the kitchen window, looking out over the ranch. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields as the evening set in. She watched Elias and Laya walking back toward the house, their figures framed against the backdrop of the land that had come to feel like home again. For the first time since Samuel's death, Clara felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. The land was thriving, and so was she. Everything's coming together, Clara whispered to herself, as though the thought alone might jinx it. Her heart had slowly begun to heal. She hadn't realized how broken it had been until Elias's presence, so steady and sure, had started to fill the cracks. And then there was Laya, whose boundless optimism reminded her of all the things worth fighting for. It was a family, the kind she had never thought she'd have again, but the kind she'd built from the ground up, piece by piece. As Elias and Laya entered the house, Clara turned from the window. Elias smiled, his eyes soft and filled with that quiet affection that had grown between them over the past few weeks. He had stopped asking if she was ready. He no longer needed to, because it was clear now. This was home. This was family. "Is everything settled?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she moved toward them. Elias nodded. "The cattle are in the east pasture. We'll move them to the higher ground next week when the grass is thick enough." "And Laya?" Clara teased, glancing down at the small girl who was already working her way through the leftover bread on the kitchen counter. "She's already plotting out next month's chores." Elias grinned, his voice full of fondness. Laya beamed up at Clara. "I made a list of things we can do for the ranch," she said, her wide eyes gleaming with pride. "We can plant new crops, fix the barn roof, and—" Clara laughed, cutting her off gently. "You're a little planner, aren't you?" Laya nodded enthusiastically. "I want to make everything better. I want to help." Clara's heart swelled. There was no denying it anymore. Laya was her daughter in every way that mattered, and Elias was her partner in life and love. She had been afraid of letting herself believe it, but now it felt like the only truth worth holding on to. Later that evening, after dinner, they sat together by the fire. Laya had fallen asleep with her head in Clara's lap, her small body curled up like a perfect little piece of peace. Elias was beside her, quietly sharpening a knife, the soft scrape of the steel against the stone filling the silence between them. Clara looked at the man sitting beside her, the man who had become so much more than a stranger, who had knocked on her door in the snowstorm. The house was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, and the night stretched out before them like a promise. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this, the quiet, the comfort of having someone to share it with. Clara reached for Elias's hand, her fingers brushing against his. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers, and for a moment there was nothing else but the two of them, sitting in the warmth of the firelight. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, her voice full of the depth of everything she couldn't quite put into words. Elias's hand tightened around hers, his expression tender. "I'm glad too, Clara. I never thought I'd find this again. A place, a purpose." Clara smiled, her heart full. "We've made this place ours. And we'll keep making it ours, together." Elias's smile widened, and he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. For a moment, Clara closed her eyes, savoring the feeling of being here, with him, with Laya, of being part of something real. As the days passed, the weather grew warmer, and the ranch began to come alive in a way it hadn't in years. The cattle grew stronger, the crops started to sprout, and the small house, once filled with nothing but silence, now hummed with life. Laya was growing, her curiosity expanding with each new thing Clara taught her, and Elias was always there, working alongside them, quietly and steadfastly proving that this was a family in every sense of the word. But despite the peace they had found, Clara knew the danger wasn't gone. Lawrence Hartwick still hovered in the background, his land still bordering hers, still eyeing the property he wanted to take. Clara knew that the peace they had now, the life they had built, was fragile. It was something they had to protect. A week after the storm had passed, and the valley was starting to breathe again, Clara stood in the yard, staring at the horizon, where the mountains rose like sentinels against the sky. Elias joined her, his presence a constant, grounding her as always. "It's not over," Clara said quietly, her gaze fixed on the distant land. Elias didn't need to ask what she meant. He already knew. It never is. But we're ready for it now, whatever comes. Clara turned to him, her heart full, and for the first time she believed it. Whatever came, they would face it together. And this time, she wouldn't be alone.